here
So
for
now
the,
they've reconciled it in their mind, so they don't figure they need to come to the budget hearing.
Do we have somebody leading the
I
Pledge of
don't think we
Allegiance?
had very many
do we
last
have what?
time.
Do we have scouts leading the Pledge of Allegiance?
Kendall says somebody was bringing it.
No, I think, Lark, did you get somebody do the Pledge of Allegiance? No, no.
Okay.
This budget is extremely controversial.
But they'll be here when we,
Okay, are we ready?
yep. Rock and roll.
You ready, Jim? Are you ready, Diane?
I am.
Okay. Welcome, everybody, to the budget hearing. Thank you for coming.
If you could keep your comments.
We're glad to have everybody, all the board members here.
There's not even here.
District administration.
County Commission.
It's county commission tonight. Yeah.
Schedule ours on there more often.
And I guess we'll start with a pledge of allegiance. So if everybody wants to rise. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Lark, we're ready for a budget presentation. Oh, Kendall, sorry, I'm skipping Kendall. Kendall.
You want to get right to the budget.
Yeah, I'm so excited about it. Kendall Thomas is here to talk about the Scouts, right?
I do.
I skipped it right over it.
All you got to go on the tour that this last week was just fun. And the school bus, the fun bus went up.
Topher.
I want to share with you some of the benefits that I get to see, and that's kids. Kids being involved. And Andy Peterson's son needed an Eagle Scout project on All Star Team. And before it was all done, his wife came and talked to me, and Andy sicked his wife on his family. And the next thing we had 3 Eagle Scout projects. And one of the kids from their troop, he chose to paint picnic tables. And anything with wood that needed to be painted. And I said, I got a tape measure in my car. Well, I go over to the tape measure, get my tape measure out of my car, my toolbox is at the truck. So I found this sign.
Sidewalk.
Right, don't drive on the sidewalks. Well, how big is the sign? So what the kid did, him and his mom teaches art between the junior high and Park Johnson, I think.
Two junior high, she splits.
Yeah. And I says, do you know how much paint you're gonna need? And he said, I don't have no idea. And I said, well, I'm not buying 5 gallons of paint. But I said, I'll buy what you need. So him and his mom got together. Well, I think there's like 20 of those tables. And then they went like this across the length and the width. And you know how close he came out to being? He says, Kendall, you better buy 3 gallons of paint, because I think we'll need a little extra. Come out to 2.5 gallons is what he used.
Wow.
So he took all these flips and the flops, and he said, I'll get with my math teacher, and that's exactly what it went.
Wow,
Went
nice.
back and figured that all out. And,
Talking to the mic. Kendall was talking
Oh.
about you.
Oh, sorry.
It's the recording, it won't pick you up.
okay,
We've got to actually turn it on.
perfect. I do.
What the heck?
What if we talk real loud?
There's a light. What is
You have
that?
to be more patient.
Okay, that was weird.
Don't tell me I gotta be more patient all the time. But
Jim's got it.
and so anyhow, this last week, and I'll hurry right along so you get into the exciting part of, thank you, of the meeting is Eagle Mountain came up. About 3 weeks ago, they got with me and walked it all down. And so we started at the cemetery. And there was no way to get, unless you went up the hill to get to the cemetery, and there was no way from the new cemetery to the old cemetery. You had to crawl under cedar trees. It was a mess. So I said, why don't we trim the cedar trees back. Long story short, we had to go down a gully, and up the other side was the best way to get there. So there were over 70 kids, and I don't know how many leaders, probably that many leaders. They made a really nice pathway with rock borders. You thought it was at a girls' camp the way it is. Everybody has to have those rock borders all the way clear over to the cemetery.
They cut the fence, the field fence, because you used to have to climb over the gate, over the fence to get into the old cemetery. Now you can walk straight in. Up at the ballpark, today the maintenance crew went up and hauled off 2 loads of branches. They cleaned all the overhanging branches off. They cleaned it up, raked it all down. It looks so much nicer than it did when y'all went up there. So what I'm saying is this is going to be a great asset to our kids, to be able to create teaching moments. We keep thinking about yurts, and now we can use those yurts for classrooms in the summers. We can use them for the classrooms for in the winter to explore and create. And I've got a list of service projects that people want when they come up there and say, we want to have a family reunion. Have you got any service projects we can do? We got them lined up. Terry Christensen has 3 Eagle Scout kids that are up for a project. We got them all lined up. We can go up in the canyon. We can work on the trails. We can learn about conservation, all because of a gift to the Tooele School District. And I appreciate y'all's support to say, what can we do? How can we optimize this wonderful, wonderful gift, the historical district. So great things are going to happen because of good leadership, starting with the board, to the superintendent, to the foundation working together with our community. We can have great things happen. The water is going to be, there's 2 big problems we have, and then I'm going to sit down. 2 is the water. The grass is horrible. And the second one is parking. Parking is going to be a nightmare for us. But we can work on those kind of things. But anyhow, thank you very much. I just wanted to report on that this is a hands-on learning center, and we're going to let kids do service doing it. So anyhow, hey, thank you very much, and I'm going to depart.
Do you mind if we ask, so what's the update on the with the
water?
The government or the depot and
the way it has to work is there's 2 people that own the water. Uncle Sam owns 60% of the water, and Georgia Russell owns 40% of all the surface water. And that surface water is free-flowing water, not well water. And so the government we've already talked to them, and they said we can make the connection, but they have to have an over irrigation meeting to vote on it. And so the people at the depot that I've been working with said, we know how the vote's going to go. It's 3-1 or 2-1. There's only 3 people that vote. So anyhow, I'm hoping by the 4th of July, if everything goes good, Steve West, we've all been up there and looked at it, and then we can issue as soon as we have something in writing that says to proceed, then we're going to move forward. So good question, Carol.
great.
Thanks for taking us up there
Kendall,
too.
if you're the one that's talking to Georgia, we've got it made.
I talked to her, and she ran me out of the house.
Yeah.
She did?
Yeah, I was.
Well,
I
that's
thought I had some
unusual for her to
connection.
run you out of that. You better send the 2 boys up.
Yeah, I'll send it to her.
Hey, they worked for her.
Yeah,
Thanks,
they've worked for
Kendall.
her.
She loved those 2. Send them up.
Yeah, send them up.
Thank you,
Thank
Kendall.
you.
But anyhow, thanks
Thank
you
you
guys.
for all.
Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
and
Thanks
thanks
for
for
all your
killing that
work.
rattlesnake.
Yeah. Oh, now you know what else? I had 2 people tell me you can't kill a rattlesnake.
That's what we
It's against state law.
It's against the law to kill any snakes in the state of Utah, but I don't think anybody follows the
Shouldn't
law.
have had that up.
No, and the superintendent's the one that's got the evidence. So if anybody, it all runs downhill, Scott. You've got the evidence. So.
My grandkids thought that was the coolest thing I brought.
Well, you're a cool grandpa. Hey, thanks you guys.
Thanks for all your work.
Rattles.
Okay.
So, are you going to manufacture those kind of baby rattles? Because they're hot.
See you,
I've
Kendall.
got enough grandbabies to keep you in business.
Oh, gosh. Okay, Lark. Now it's your turn.
Okay. This is the fun part, to be able to have, up until now, you've probably looked at the one budget we had online and reviewed it, and then as of yesterday, oh wow, there's 3 more. So you're probably wondering how and are we going to get to that all today. So I hope that if nothing else, this presentation relaxes you. I can tell there's not very many people here to watch it, so as we walk through it. So I hope it makes sense what I attempted to do, and it's just because there are so many last-minute changes, and by golly, I just want to say it seems like it's been that way every year. We get here and there's been another change as soon as the county lets us know, and so just to put you at ease, though, they're not really major changes. I'd walk through them here if you haven't had time to study them. I want to talk about the 4 options, and because this is the important time, I guess, collectively as a as a board that you decide which one of these options you feel like would be best moving into next year. And if I can't answer that in this, please do make sure you stop me, and so that we're clear when it comes to time to make the decisions. But let's start with the final 17 budget. And in all this, I'm going to compare it to version 1 because that's what you've had. That's what we prepared, as you recall. We had to have that publicly available by June 1st, and we haven't had to make any tweaks. But in our last board meeting, I talked about there will be changes to it. And so I was up yesterday when I was working. I was actually working on it late, thinking I still hadn't heard anything from the state, and thought I just better come up with a version 2, my best guess. And lo and behold, as I was working on it, in came the state numbers. So I could actually finalize it today. So thank you for your patience.
told me she was tired of you talking about her, so she had to get
Okay, well, we appreciate it, right? But let's start with the final 17 budget, because as just one last quick review, we felt like it was good to go except for these changes that are in there. And most of it deals with the foundation now that Kendall has left. But I got an email from Ed this year, and it came up last year, and we decided we were going to do it this year. But he started to keep a tally of donations that have been given to the foundation that are non-cash donations. The biggest one I can think of, I believe, is called Stamping Up. They donate a lot of goods. They don't sell at their store. They donate them to us. And so we asked some other districts how they handle that, and because they give you a dollar figure on it. Long story short, he talked to Salt Lake School District. They value it at 50% because they feel like that dollar value they give you is overstated. It's I don't know if you want to call it list price or whatever, but they came up with a 50%. And so that's what he's been tracking it at, if you're curious. So when the auditors come, we're just going to show them this is how we did it, so that they can make sure it gets accounted for on the $990 that the foundation will actually have to prepare. But long story short, he felt like there needed to be $630,000, if I recall from his email correctly. But that being said, we also felt like expenditures were a little bit overstated. So the rounding there, that's where we came up with the even $600,000 in donations. Now, because it truly is non-cash, and it's not a, we were given items in this case, the best thing to do is show it as a wash or an offsetting amount. And so we have a revenue and expenditure that happen to be the same amount. We do the same thing with commodities and food service, if you're curious about the USDA commodities that they give to us. And so we're just doing the same thing in the foundation, and we have that value in there. That, of course, is going to increase our revenues and expenditures, but it's all in Fund 71. And the rest of them, as far as changes, that was the only changes to 17. That is included in version 2, 3, and 4, as I've just been calling them, of the proposed 18 budget. So all the 17s will be the same. It includes that. So that would be our recommendation, is to adopt one of those. And so why don't we jump into those highlights, just once again to go over them. About 17, it is a budget, balanced general fund budget. When I say that, I fully expect that we'll have some fallout as in years past. I left some of these things in there from last year, so we can just move right along, right? But I did want to point, just show you from a pie chart perspective, because I like to see these. You can see that most of it goes into instruction and classroom in our final budget at 67%. That's always good to be able to show people that. And you can see the rest of how the pie is divided up amongst the various other categories. I will point out that 2900 function, this will be the last year we have that. You're probably wondering what 2900 function is. That's the charter school local replacement funds that have been netted against our revenues. That's going to change next year, and when I get into the tax rates, maybe I can show you that. But I just wanted to point that out on this slide. And then I like to also see it from the object level, majority going into salaries and benefits. As you can see, in years past, that has been our tradition, and it continues to be that way in our general fund. Now, it has been a higher percentage if you add those two together. It'd be roughly 86%. You know, we've been upwards of 90%, but what I do want to point out is in this final budget compared to what you were given earlier in the year is there's two major factors. I talked about trust lands last time being moved in there. Trust lands, even though some of it is spent on salaries and benefits, a lot of it is not. And so that would be one reason for the increase. The other reason, if you're curious, is there are certain programs that have a large carryover, is the best way to put it. And a lot of times when it comes to budgeting, they put it in a supply or something other than salaries and benefits. And so that's what makes it look like. But I would project that when you actually see the actual numbers at year end, when we close the financials, it'll be higher than that. And so I know this is a little bit later on, but I just wanted to see if you had any questions about the 17 budget. If not, and once again, apologize. I used last year's PowerPoint presentation, which I put the motion in there, so I thought it was a good time just to show you that. And Diane's done a good job this year breaking it out so that we make sure we're voting on them separately. But the 17 budget does need to be adopted in order to change it as our final budget. On to the 18 year, which is our proposal for next year. And this is when we get into the different options. I did want to just highlight some things on here that maybe I didn't bring up last meeting. It's a balanced overall budget with version 2 or 3. We'll go over here. Version 4 actually isn't. And I actually added that at the end, so hope it makes sense, and I'll explain it later. I believe a few board members asked for version 4, and so we'll go over that. But it does include all the negotiated agreements that was voted on last time. Want to make sure that was in there, and I just wanted to put this little footnote in there. That was a major priority for the school board this past year, and we've said it in so many meetings that I think we need to highlight that that's what we built this budget upon. We're going to make that a priority. Some of the questions.
You need to turn your microphone.
Okay. So just clarifying that first bullet point before you go past it.
Okay.
I'm making sure I fully understand. This would balance. So because prior, I had the impression that we negotiated some of those compensation increases, and as a result of that, we would actually be dipping into our fund balance.
Mm-hmm.
If I understand that first bullet point correctly, we will not be dipping into our fund balance. Is that right?
I should have added that individual funds may. This was looking at all funds, and I point that out because the general fund will be a negative if you look at them in two. Actually, it is in all three versions, but capital projects, for example, will have a surplus, and when you look at all funds together, that's what I should have stressed there. That includes all funds.
So for salaries, we dip into reserves, but overall our budget is balanced.
Okay.
Exactly. That is
Mark,
the case.
what is position-based budgeting?
That's a good question because it's a tough. It was the best way to put this is when we submit a report on negotiations, which we had to this year, and you all know what we gave out as far as and a lot of times they ask for percentage. We're not talking about a percentage for an employee, but a percentage overall for the school district of what that increase would be. When you look at, for example, our certified classification of employees, that was over 8%. I forget the exact number off the top, but it doesn't. But as you recall, when we have a 4% WPU increase, that is actually one of the questions in the negotiation report because of how aggressive some of the school districts have been this year. They asked if you were above 4%, justify why and how. And the two things that I probably haven't stressed are these two bullet points, the whys and the how. Position-based budgeting is something that we tried new this year. In the past, just to answer your question, in the past we have calculated what we feel like that increase would be over a prior year. And in the case of salaries and benefits, we would add that to what was in the budget in prior years. With our software, they have the option of using a position-based budgeting, which we tried this year. And it's to take your existing positions, and you can put in your your increases for next year as far as salaries, and it will be able to run a projection what it'll be next year. It gets more detailed, more accurate, and it takes away some of the fallout in years past budgets, and that's why we felt like we could be more aggressive this year. One of the strategies we used was the position-based budgeting. That makes sense. It allowed us to get more accurate in our projections for positioning next year. The other thing is we just took a good look at year end of some things that we could cut as far as expenditures and cut out some excess. Now, because position-based budgeting covers most of the payroll and benefits, this would be our 300 objects and above. But we were able to look at some of those and make some cuts. And that's how we felt like we were able to offer what we were this year, was a combination of those two new tactics this year, or strategies, I should say. Does that help?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's how we were able to develop that. Now, since our last meeting, and I already said this, it came in yesterday. I think it was close to 5 or 6 o'clock when this email came in. And so I stayed making sure we had version 2 and 3. And then this morning, I just felt like, I'm sorry, we need to have a version 4. So I hope I can explain through those. But between now and then, as you recall, I was the first numbers I received from the the county on our rates, and maybe it'd be best if I get out and into it if you're okay with me jumping in there right now. You saw this last time, so if you don't mind, the valuation didn't change. The auditor certified rate stayed as it was. And as you recall that I talked about, there was two figures here. There's a green one and a yellow figure. The green one was actually less than 2016 if I go to 2016. That's what they set the rates on. Now, because it was less, that means our tax rate would normally be higher to generate the same revenue. Using that logic, I was fully projecting that we would have a tax rate above 009593, which it has been the last few years. Because two other rates, the 4 levies that applies to, all increased. And I'll show you that here in just a minute. But because the other 2 levies decreased enough, we can actually, the auditor certified rate, you'll see here in a bit, would be 9122. And so all those come into play, and those were things we didn't know right up until the end. The other 2 levies I'm talking about was the basic levy, the one we were waiting on in our debt service. So, but the interesting thing is, maybe you recall us, I think it was around $60,000 or $70,000 of new growth that highlighted. It looks orange on my screen. Hope it looks orange to you up there, just above, between the green and the yellow numbers there. The state, or the county, I got a call from, or an email from Tooele, who works with Maryland. State auditor mentioned that our county auditor / clerk, I should say, she had mentioned that with the ATI closing, hopefully I remember their name right, is that the company, the ATI, that the North Rowley, which has been in an RDA, that North Rowley, they felt like it had reached the end of its useful RDA life, whatever, they'd given out the maximum premium, and they were including that in new growth. Now, that wasn't in here, as you recall, when we met last Tuesday. We did not have that information. So this was Friday. I found out they said they were going to run new numbers. I found out on Monday what that would be, and as you can see in here, they have 291 million of new growth in there. So that's a long-winded way of saying, when I get in the PowerPoint, that we are actually going to have a windfall this year. That new growth is good for us, and you'll kind of see why. So,
is there a chance that would be contested? I mean, I'm just thinking out loud.
Want it back in an RDA.
Well, I was thinking the current owners of that property, or is that really solid, or is there a chance that if I had an RDA and I'm getting tax exempt for all that property, I would fight that decision if I could, or is it pretty solid that, do you see what I'm asking? I'm just, are
Good
we?
question. I haven't actually asked them,
Well,
and I don't know,
the
but
terms of it, and is it sounded like it was just, well, we decided. Well, is the body that makes that decision? I mean, not we, but the county auditor, clerk, or is that?
Well, if this rate
I
is
believe
certified-
it was the new committee they set up that, I forget what it's called.
Economic development or something?
They were just, you mean the government, that
The one that Randy Sands over, he's been here. I believe it's that committee that,
Not the government, the new
So
one
that's the one
that's-
that
Oh,
we
not
asked for,
the-
so that's.
yeah.
Well, I guess I just want to make
That's a good
sure that
point.
that's not, that we're not going to plan around that, and then they suddenly
I
say,
thought that was
oh,
the-
But if it's certified
Right.
too,
I
then.
guess if it's
It-
certified, then we're okay.
It is a potential windfall, but that being said, like any other thing, they can always contest it, and the collections may be below that. We'll find out. But I agree, it might be risky whether we'll get it or not. It is in there. Now I believe it's up to the company, of course, to protest
Or pay it.
their evaluation or pay. Correct.
If they're not doing well, they may put that off for years.
Yeah. So that's a very good question there.
And how much is it again?
291.
I wish I remembered the numbers of new growth before. Actually, you can see it there.
Some of us
See the
can.
project area? I made it smaller. I was focusing on the 291, but if you recall right, I thought it was 91, but you can see the 80,000 there. That's in real property growth. If you come down here to project area new growth, that would be the RDAs, CDAs, etc. That's the 236.
36 million.
So quite a
'Cause
large amount.
before, that was actually negative last week.
Negative or zero, if I recall right.
But
It
still,
was-
that's a big
okay.
difference.
It was actually, if you come over here, they'll show a negative change because it was a personal property. But over here, it was a zero because they broke out this last year. They broke out centrally assessed in these RDAs, CDAs, and they call them separate buckets. And for new growth factor, they changed that this past year. So that's why they're showing them over here in these buckets, as they call them, or these highlighted figures. No new growth and is centrally assessed, even though it actually declined if you go to the right. And same thing in this project area, you can see that increase in new growth. Oops. Okay, well, just by hitting back, I went to the rates. And this is what I wanted to show you. So this is the page. It wouldn't let me make it larger, so I'll apologize in advance. Without zooming in. Maybe that'll help. But you can see the maximum by law or board levy, as you recall, can be a 0025 because the auditor certified auditor evaluation, that green number on the other screen was lower. They certified it at .002529, which happens to be the next column over. And get my scrolling here. And I actually used that rate over here, 2529. Now, while I'm here, this is the other thing I wanted to show you. Change in law. You see now there's 2 lines in there. Last year it used to be 1. This year, if you recall from the legislature, is the year that when the valuations go out this year, they're actually going to have I got to scroll to the right to remember the exact, left to remember the exact title, charter school levy. So charter schools are actually broken out, but as you recall in the law, it was to come out of that 0025. So so that you know that it's going to show up on the valuations. They're going to have a, what is that? Quadruple 092 rate, budgeted to generate $350,000. That happens to be an expenditure that we had under that 2,900 I said in years. That's now going away. It used to be they wanted us to show it as revenue, that we were entitled to it, and then we had to pay it back to go to charter schools. It's always been a fight, and so in the legislature they decided just to put it on there, take away this. We have to recognize it as revenue. So we don't have to do that anymore, have this revenue and offsetting expenditure anymore on next year's books. So, but just wanted to point that out. So if you happen to be like me and were worried when this was presented to us from the tax commission, I will add this one caveat, because this is on the value of the properties throughout the county for next year. When it comes to budgeted, they also have the collection rate in there. What I wanted to point out is the first thing that I thought of as well, vehicle fees in lieu, as well as redemptions, property tax from prior year, aren't included in these, and so when we budget, we add those in. And when we receive revenues, and throughout the county, they usually break it out by percentage, the percentage of that tax. So if we had a tax rate, for example, of 009593, and 0025 was for our board local levy that we had up here highlighted, that means 0025 divided by the 009593, that percentage times our revenue is what we put into our board and local revenue. I say that because we do the same thing with fees in lieu and redemptions get spread the same way. And so when I see a budget of $350, we usually get more because we have fee in lieu on vehicle taxes as well as redemptions. And so I specifically asked, well, it says a budgeted $350, but they're going to get more at a county level because of that. We were told that the counties have been directed to only withhold up to $350, and then any excess or windfall comes to the school district. So that is a good thing, if you were curious. All right. Trying to remember where I was at here. Apologize. Yeah, our new developments from our last meeting. So that in a nutshell is what we were given. So version 2 of the budget, which is what I started to work on. Originally, like I said, I thought that we would only need a version 2 because our property taxes would be higher. But due to the fact that the basic rate, and I probably had that on the previous slide, 1568, it was 1675, so you see it fell quite a bit this last year when it comes to a basic rate. Because of that fall and the fact that our debt levy, even though it was similar to last year, didn't increase, those two falls compared to the increases on the auditor's certified rate actually would lower our tax rate, which I have on the bottom line there, from what it currently is to 009122. That's without going through a truth and taxation hearing, and that's what budget version 2 is based upon. Now, realizing
How much is that on an average home? How much is that? Maybe I'm jumping ahead.
Jump ahead. It's another slide down.
Okay, all right, never mind.
okay,
Okay.
Even as the advertisement.
so
I was thinking ahead about the topic you brought up.
Yep.
and so and I also, as you recall, had built in some roundabout way new growth in our throughout the county. That was a little bit overstated, and so I told you we need to bring that down this last time. Even though the RDA helped, that we don't have to reduce it as much. All my comparisons in here are the version 1 that that was presented last week. So compared to that, our property taxes, we need to reduce them by 1.7 million roughly. Now the majority of that is in the capital fund, hence the reason that the general fund budgeted deficit did not change a whole lot in version 2. So I wanted to point out that's what's included in version 2. Version 3 was to look at, well, because the overall tax rate lowered to that 9122, what happens if we stick to our strategy that we've had the last few years and go through truth and taxation hearing? I wanted to show what that would be in version 3. That would result in actually more revenue than was budgeted in version 1, but the majority of that once again going to the capital fund, because that seems to be where our offset is. The logic is our general fund, as you already know, is maxed out by law on the amounts that were in there. And so it does help, going back to what I said, you spread revenue as a percentage of the rate. So as the overall rate increases, there's a long story short, you remember there's an offset to the federal funds depending on the basic rate. And so that's why even the general fund will change a little bit. and the general fund did, it changed down to $177,000 deficit in version 3, if you look at that. So now version 3 would require truth in taxation. So to go to the question of what would that advertisement be, I plugged in the numbers just to look at it. This is what the advertisement would look like. That on a average residence with their exemption for a personal residence, it would be $51.81, and on a business of $94.20. We feel like we ought to increase it to a $200,000 home, because our county average, the last I talked to the assessor, is closer to that. They were around 197, 195, but you're getting close enough to 200,000 for easy math. The last thing I wanted to point out is it will be advertised as a 5.46% increase above last year's property tax value, which, we don't have any.
That's not really over what they paid. That's over if the certified rate floated down.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. And so we can't really change that language, as you know. That's just the way it has to be advertised by law.
An increase from what
What it would have dropped to.
What it would have
dropped to.
Where are you running around?
So, as you know, our big priority has been, or that we've been talking about this next year, is the voted local levy, and increasing that. We've talked about up to 0001, which would increase our guarantee to currently the state maximum for that they guarantee at this point. So version 4 is what was presented. I think a few board members, as I recall, talked about this last time, so I thought, well, why don't I show it to you? It'd be best if you have it to compare the numbers. So using once again, the flat tax strategy, 9593, I took the 001 off of that and prepared version 4, so that's really the main difference. That one gets to be intriguing because, once again, it goes by the percentage of that spread, and it will actually decrease the amount of state revenue we receive because, in this case, the denominator is a lower rate when you spread that basic school levy. So what that would basically do, and that's what I wanted to point out in here, is that of course, it results in lower tax revenues, and I wanted to show you the difference from version 1 and from version 2, which is the auditor certified tax rate. You can see the decreases on both of those I wanted to point out. Of course, it wouldn't require truth in taxation in August because we're technically lowering the tax rate. It would result in an overall deficit in our budget. This is all funds, or a use of fund balance. The general fund deficit would increase to $732,000, as you can see. The pros for doing this, which is what we would need to focus on if that was going to be discussed, is it does reduce taxes heading into the election, and so the thought would be, can we capitalize on some positive publicity doing that? I believe, and this is just my personal interpretation, you know how we've gone over the Utah code that I have quoted there, and that's referring to the voted leeway. As you recall in there, it says when it's contingent upon offsetting, when the rate is contingent upon offsetting or reducing another rate, then we have this clause in law that you can't increase above that without going to the voted public, which is why I have personally always said after when Bruce presented it to us that my personal opinion is if we're going through that headache, I don't want to be locked into, we can't ever increase it above a certain amount without going to the public. I think it ought to just stand on its own and have it on its own merits rather than trying to get into the language like we have on bonds that it will go up by this dollar figure, but because we're reducing and offsetting a levy, it would result in this increase. That of course is what that law is addressing now. And the reason I point that out is because I believe it avoids that, because you're not advertising it as such. You've simply reduced it before you even advertise. So I think you might be able to avoid the consequence.
As I thought about this, though, isn't there a problem with, the only reason we're able to keep our certified rate, our rate above the certified rate is because it's already there. So if we were to bring this back, let's walk through that scenario. If the voted leeway didn't pass in November, let's say we did version 4, it didn't pass in November, we wouldn't be able to go back to 0.009593. We can only go up to the cert. Am I remembering something, Lark, or am I making up law?
No, that's what I was getting at. As long as you didn't advertise it, that it was a reduction in this other levy, I think we would avoid that.
But then it defeats the
But-
purpose a little bit.
Okay, unless your intent was to lower it and advertise it that way, and then I'll.
That's why we would
Okay,
do it.
then it could
Because
potentially lock you in
Otherwise,
at the
we'd
lower
get
rate.
no publicity.
Why do it if we can't get
Yeah,
mileage out of it,
the
right?
other
Yeah.
cog in the wheel is what happens with the ballot initiative with our schools now, and whether or not that, you know what I'm saying, is it better for us to get the revenue that we've been getting and keep our flat tax philosophy and then try to sell that as an increase on its own merits, or if we say, all right, we're gonna drop that, and then in the same election in November, they're gonna be voting on our schools now. So in my mind, they're gonna say, what are you gonna do with that $750 million? You're not gonna get that and a voted leeway from us. So, I mean, I'm just trying to figure
Right.
a strategy out for that.
Well, as Karen pointed out, the Our Schools Now initiative the vote isn't until 2018. So
According to their
yeah, because they have to
information.
gather signatures this summer, get them certified, I think, and then it would be on the ballot in 2018.
That's what
Right.
their flyer said.
So we have this year basically to beat them at their game. I worry about our schools. I like the philosophy of what they're doing, but I worry that it will hurt our district actually.
I don't like putting in schools.
So I don't know. We have kind of this year as our window of opportunity, I would say.
We're not competing head to head.
Well,
Well,
Lark,
we're gonna
But
get
is
out,
there a
I'm
chance
just
that we're gonna go
letting
out
you
to
know, when
bond
the
in
teachers come back,
2019?
we have a small committee that's working on a $40,000 salary schedule with lanes and that kind of stuff. And the main thing we're hearing from our teachers is, we want our steps back, we want our steps back. And so the trick is always in the walkover, when you go to 40,000 and then you establish, one column like several other districts, the issue is when you walk over, are you just giving new teachers 3,000, or are you giving 2,500 or 3,000 to your
Everybody
returning
else will move
teachers? And
over.
you could get there by actually walking over and doing, and I know Lark's been working on that, we've been meeting with TEA on that, but the plan was for us to, as a second part of negotiations, we did a package this year. Second part was, let's get behind, and then we'll be able to do more, and even maybe more with insurance. So that, by the time they come back, we'll have at least a proposed or a draft of what we would like to see in a salary schedule.
hey, Lark,
Yeah.
I had asked you for the idea of version 4, and I appreciate you running the numbers. Those numbers give me a lot of concern. It was a great idea on a high level, but I would suggest, and I mean, the rest of the board can think differently, obviously, but I know where my feelings are, and it would be not to do 4, but I needed to see
Scary.
it. I needed to
Good.
see it. So thank you for
Good.
doing that. I appreciate the
problem.
work you put into it.
No problem. Matter of fact, just the bottom bullet point, and maybe I interpret it wrong. I was picturing not capitalizing. I'm not saying we couldn't advertise for it. We could advertise as, look, we've lowered the levy. What I was getting into is the actual ballot language. As long as we got away from, we lowered this one to do that, I thought it wouldn't lock us in. And my thought was, the only con I could see to that strategy was then, like you said, worst case scenario, it doesn't pass. Next year, we would go through truth and taxation to bump that back up to 9,593. Well, you saw what a small increase was there. I don't need to tell you that $2 million would look, on paper, it'd have a huge percent, and dollars per home, it'd be, quite large.
$300 or $400 per home.
So that was the one con I could see to that strategy. Just want to point that out. But I had to leave this slide in for last year. I hope you laughed at it. When it comes to consistency, the little footnote there, it's only a virtue if you're not a screw up. But but my point was is it just showing how much a little bit of the change on there changed the trajectory, and that's why I thought about this arrow there, how it seems to be at the bottom. They're consistent, but it's not hitting the mark. And so my point was just it's amazing what those little fractions of a percent do in property taxes when it comes to an overall budget. So our summary is the two that when it comes to 14, the reason we have the three options is version 2, of course, we needed to make changes and have a version 2. When preparing it, that one, well, I'll just say it right now. It'd probably be easier to say it now as you think and strategize for the future. I personally am leaning towards number 2, and here's just my logic. Once you get into your discussion, you can do that. And the reason why is just because it would not require truth and taxation this year, and I think that would help us going into the election. Just bottom line, that's what that one is. Version 3 sticks to our flat tax theory. It would require truth and taxation. It does generate new revenue, but as you can see, the majority of that goes to capital. There is some in the general fund, but version 4, do I need to even talk about version 4 anymore?
No.
There's some feeling on it. It does reduce the tax. So those are what was there. So when it comes to the motion, I just wanted to point out that's the reason they have these different versions, 2 and 4. In my logic here, because they don't require truth and taxation, they could be adopted today as the beginning FY18 budget, and that would be the one that we would be able to finalize our rate, that we could have Marisa sign the paper and finalize the rate. Version 3, we really can't formally adopt until after the truth and taxation hearing, so that's why I use the word a tentative, as how we've called it in the past, a tentative beginning budget for 18. And so that's the difference in the motion between the options, whether we're adopting a beginning budget or a tentative because of those requirements. Any questions on that? Okay, well, that's really all I had to describe those questions, unless you saw anything as you reviewed the three options there.
Nice job, Laura.
Yeah, good job. I don't see anybody here from the public. Does anybody want to comment out there? No? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Okay, so first we have a final budget adoption for fiscal year 2017, which you kind of went over. Do you have anybody have any questions about that? Do you want to say anything else about it?
I should have, hopefully I did a good job stressing this. 2, 3, and 4 have the same 17 budget, so I don't know that you need to choose a budget as much as I would recommend that we make the changes of the 600,000 non-cash.
So you want
So it's
a
a
motion?
motion, 'cause
I
we
can
have-
get you a motion.
Okay.
I motion that we adopt the proposed final fiscal year 2017 budget as the board adopted final budget for fiscal year 2017, shouldn't it be?
Yes.
I'm reading
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Scott and seconded by Karen to adopt the proposed final budget for 2017 as stated with the changes. Any discussion to that motion? I forgot what I was doing there for a second. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. And then we have a budget adoption for fiscal year 18. Yeah.
Oh,
Good.
how to.
We have a motion.
Okay.
Let's
Okay. One thing, if we, I gotta think about this. If we were to adopt version 3, it requires a truth and taxation hearing. We don't actually have to raise the tax in August.
Correct.
right?
Correct,
It-
just after hearing.
It buys a little bit more time. I mean, maybe it's not as good for you.
Okay, no, that's fine.
I don't know. I'm just thinking it through.
The only advantage I see is the two versus, I mean, that logic is even the very thought that we've put it out in the paper. I mean, if we're not doing it, if we're not following through, you're gonna get that negative publicity by, well, look, they advertised it. I mean, the minute it goes in the paper that we're going, those numbers that Lark said, it's out there. Whether or not we even adopt it, I bet a lot of folks wouldn't even know. But they're gonna see it on their tax, on their property tax notice. They're gonna come waving like they always do. And so I guess my thought is, if we're not intending on following through, or we're not sure, don't go there unless we're pretty sure. Because if we're gonna go back to number 2, let's get the mileage out of it, not. I mean, that's one thought. I don't.
But do you get any mileage out of it? No, because
think you might.
I don't think anybody looks at that and thinks, oh, they lowered my taxes. They just pay their tax.
No, they don't say they're lowered, but they're not increasing.
You'll get a
Right.
story out of Tim that talks about that. So if you don't read the transcript bulletin, okay, and your home valued higher, you're going to pay a higher tax, not a tax rate. So you're right. Some people don't look at that, but Tim will write a story saying that we're allowing that to float down to the certified tax rate, and the risk is really what, $177,000
Yeah, it's not a big amount.
I think we could use that though for advertising.
internal.
That we
That
didn't.
we could produce our own saying, hey, we're letting this float down because we
Yeah.
really would like to,
Otherwise,
The
it looks like
advertisement,
a
we
tax
can really
increase in
say
August
ourselves
and
what we
another
want.
one in
Yeah,
November.
You're right.
That's the advantage.
I'd pay
Exactly.
$177,000 for a chance at $7 million.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the voted.
Marie, what do
think
you think
the-
about messaging?
Excuse me.
We're gonna. Always reminds me of Mr. Mom, the movie, when they said, we're gonna, at whatever tuna, you've been hit by these hard times, we're gonna lower it temporarily and then,
Raise it back up.
Remember, that was one of the strategies that was talked about and I don't know how well that goes over with our people, especially when, so we're gonna lower it, then we're gonna raise it, and then students now might raise income tax, and, that's when I think people start.
You might get.
Carol and then Scott.
The other thing that I just am concerned about, and I brought it up earlier, was just the fact that unfortunately I felt like the headline of the last, the article from last week's meeting saying that we're raising taxes and we have lower spending. And unfortunately, I think that already, for those who paid attention and see it, but those headlines still, even though if you read the article, you'd understand that it wasn't really that way, but it is a perception out there to the taxpayers that we're raising taxes and yet our spending went down. And I feel like that may be another negative that we need to be
You're
careful.
gonna have a special type of explanation on a separate sheet with an ad if you get it explained to the tax voters.
Yeah, you're gonna have that anyway, I think.
Yeah, and
but
you know what I
no
mean?
matter what.
So putting this other in isn't gonna confuse them any more than they'll already be confused. Trying to explain truth and taxation could take you a day per person.
Scott, do you have more to say?
I think that version 2 kind of has that same effect that I was trying to achieve with version 4, which was at least we're being wise stewards of your funds. And the messaging is that we're being wise. We did not have to have a truth and taxation hearing. We didn't increase taxes in August, but we are asking for the public's help in November.
And then we don't muddy the water with that, and we go at voted leeway with recruitment and retention of teachers, and just, this is
And
how.
state guarantee.
And
Right.
If
Yeah.
we do this, we get
But-
state
We get more
match
money.
Right.
money that we
Right.
don't have to ask you for in a
In
future
addition,
year.
yeah.
I think your point of it's $170,000
It's a
gamble.
small amount.
I think that to me is more palatable than the millions of dollars in option 4.
Yeah,
And it gets
version
some
4
of the
is
same
scary. Gives me
desired outcome from my perspective. That I know we've had a philosophy of always holding certified rate, and this is kind of counter that, but there's a reason for it, and it's with strategy. And so I would be in, two seems like it makes sense. Lark's, you're speaking good sense to me.
Good with two?
Are you gonna make a motion then?
Well, I'm not a, I'm one voice. I mean, just generally, are we thinking
do?
the same?
I think so.
I am.
Mm-hmm. I think we're all on board.
I'll give you a motion if you're.
It's there.
So I motion that we adopt version 2 as the beginning fiscal year 18 budget.
I think you have to authorize me to sign the form too.
Let me just go to the darn thing. Hang on.
There it is, right up there, Scott.
Recommended.
Oh, it's an eye test now. Adopt version 2 as the beginning budget. I motion that we adopt version 2 as the beginning budget for fiscal year 18 and authorize President Manzione to sign form PT 800 for the auditor certified rate for fiscal year 18.
I'll second it.
It's been moved by Scott and seconded by Kathy to adopt version 2 as the beginning budget for fiscal year 18 and authorize President Manzione to sign form PT 800 for the auditor certified rate for fiscal year 18. Discussion to that motion?
So we asked, and then maybe we can ask Marie to contact him with that, so he'll have, since he's not here, he usually comes to these.
It's county commission.
He's actually gonna listen to this recording tomorrow and write.
Because it would be nice to have at least internal and external messaging around this decision.
Absolutely.
I would say even bigger than Tim.
We need to
Yeah,
get it out
this
to
is
our
KSL
people.
and everywhere we can get the word out, right? A press
Yeah.
release that.
Yeah. It's probably a good idea.
We need to get it out, the employees,
Yeah, to the
Need to
employees too.
because they'll get asked a lot of questions.
Yeah, and I haven't heard a lot of talk yet about our plan to go for the vote of leeway, so it'd be a good introduction, I think, to that, positive. All in favor?
So,
Oh, sorry. No, go ahead.
Lark, what is the savings on a $200,000 home?
It was
For that?
whatever we,
Whatever we just said.
whatever you didn't raise it.
$50.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
$50.
okay.
Yeah.
Right.
That'd be a good way of looking at it. Yep.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Oh, to the taxation hearing.
That's sweet. Okay, go ahead.
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
It's been moved by Carol and seconded by Ellen to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Nobody's going to come to August board meeting.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for quick meeting. Yeah.
Al, it was hot out there today, but did it really burn all that hair off?
I know, first when he walked in, I thought it was
He'll be wearing a hat from now on, the rest of the summer,
was
you better get
Jonathan
that highlight.
marble. Yeah, that's what I did. I thought,